I'm pleased to welcome you back. My name is Dick Bulterman. I'm from the CWI and the Vrije, and also an Informatics Europe board member. So if you have questions on Informatics Europe, feel free to ask me those, not as part of this session, but afterwards. I would like to welcome back our participants, Lorenz and Frank, who are sitting with us here in Madrid, and Max and Marina, who Marina is in Oxford and Max is in Darmstadt. I've got my own view of the screen here, but I'm not sure if the other two are with me. We have about 40 minutes, and I would like to reflect on some of the things that we heard this morning, and also respond to questions that you also have. And before we start, I'd just like to check with people to see if our other two panelists are with us as well, and if they're connected to audio. So if, okay, Max, we can hear you. That's great, and we can see you too, even better. And Marina, are you also with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. I jotted down a few questions. Lorenz, let me start with you and ask you to reflect on the talk that Frank gave, right?
Okay.
What is the message that stays with you? I'm not going to ask everybody this, so don't worry, but I'm just starting with you while I'm getting my notes ready here. If we think of the challenges of the AI community, and that is the perceptions from outside the community and the perceptions of inside the community, how does that compare to the perceptions outside and inside the community as it relates to, if we simplify it, to energy sustainability within the IT community?
Okay, the last part
will
be difficult, but if I may, I start with my impressions from your presentation, Frank. So I think these social issues in perceiving AI system, and in particular today's machine learning systems, they are really severe because they can create much damage. And I also learned that it really depends on properties of the AI systems we are developing. So these FAT criteria, okay. Especially the issue, how can we explain the results? How transparent is this to the people? I think these are our core issues, and I'm very grateful that you brought this to us in this transparent way. And how does it connect to sustainability? I would say it is important for society if we want to solve big problems together as not only one society, but all societies on this planet. We need to keep some common ground of understanding reality. And if AI should even support us in getting away from this common ground, this would be really dramatic and unnecessary. So we should work for transparency, for explainability in this field.
Okay. Your comment is made and the lights go on. We were reflecting at lunch on the whole notion of impacting the impact of technology, right? And how good people are at being able to impact really or to assess the future impact of technology. Marina, maybe you can share some insights into, the area that you think that there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, and that we could do a better job with technology assessment or anticipation of technology impact, and if there are fields where we need to put our trust in experts and hope that the experts do the right thing for us. You're one of those experts, but
I think that all the researchers and investigators are really, really good at pulling out the positive impacts of their research is one of the things you have to do in order to win big money to do your research. So they're really good at doing that. And what they haven't actually attended to is doing exactly the same, but thinking about anticipating then some of the negative consequences or the more downside consequences of how their technologies will impact on society, and therefore then try to make those things visible and transparent to people and to the Research Council. And when we first started, we had people saying to us, you'll never get the funding if you start talking about all the negative things that's going to come out from your technology. But actually, if you show that you're aware of these things and that you have potential ways of mitigating them, then that is what we're actually after. That's what we're looking for. Now, these things, and I think from the talk I gave this morning, these things are not done in isolation, and they're not done just by computer scientists or informatics people. This has to be opened up to deliberation with different ranges of people who understand the area that you're trying to focus on. So different people will have different expertises about what the impacts of something might be on society. I think Frank earlier on alluded to humanists who have already started down this path. Humanities and arts are already kind of embracing this and starting to think about these consequences. They need to be able to talk to quite closely with computer scientists so that we're not given guidelines as such, but we can go much deeper into how the technology works and how we might be able to mitigate for some of these things. And then that also requires, as we said, the policymakers, government, it has to be a wider deliberation. I was amazed at when we had some of the youth juries, how impactful they were, how they understood much more clearly than some of their parents or school teachers, certainly, what some of those impacts might be in the future. So I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but we just have to know how to mobilize it and give them the time to actually do that deliberation.
And I mentioned this megaphone that we've given through social media to the disenfranchised 30%, and whether it's 30 or 20 or 10, and where there is a profit incentive for the disenfranchised to create as much traffic as possible, because that's how they up their advertising revenue on platforms like YouTube. How do you have guidelines that bring informed voices to the table without having a broader community have the feeling that decisions are still being forced upon them? Is that a problem that can be solved through procedures and protocols, or is that an insoluble problem in your experience?
We definitely need better procedures and protocols. I mean, I was thinking of your question about the pandemic over my lunch. And I remembered Brian Cox, who's our professor of public engagement here in the UK, who was talking about the politicization of science. So he was talking about how the communication with the public through politicians was that they are just following the science. And yet the transparency of that process of following the science wasn't made available to the public. So they didn't see the uncertainties and the nuances of science, of that kind of modeling that was going on in the pandemic. That's the missing kind of part of this, to allow people also to come to their own understandings of what is happening here, rather than being at the end of some kind of slide show or a presentation of now you will do this, or now you will have lockdown and we are following the science, when in fact there isn't just one science, as we know, and this needs to be opened up to much wider deliberation. So when you ask me how would I have changed things, I mean, my answer would be I would create that transparency between this deliberative process. We also need to be able to have some kind of much more kind of agile emergency one that comes into play with the right kinds of people. I mean, but again, this is such a politicization. You're also talking about a post-truth society. There are many researchers now who are looking at post-truth and the spread of misinformation. And it's actually the weaponization of truth, because this isn't just disenfranchised people. This is actual political mischief making on in certain areas. So, this is a much wider problem that we'd need to kind of think about how to tackle that particular area. But I'm heartened that there's a lot of work going on in post-truth society to bring us back to some understanding of what we may be thinking of when we're talking about information and misinformation.
Post-truth society is kind of a unsettling term. So but maybe this is the exact bridge over to AI. Who knows? Frank.
Yeah. So when I reflect on Lorenz's talk, I don't know if it's the same for the people in the audience, but it made me aware how little aware we are of sustainability issues surrounding our field. And you mentioned many different aspects. You mentioned the energy use and the material use, and you could read 100 machine learning papers and there would be one that would be concerned with energy use. And I'm not a computer network or cloud computing researcher, but I'd be surprised if it was very different there. So I was really surprised how little that those urgent issues play a role in our own field until now.
If you buy a package of butter or a carton of milk, then you can have a label telling you if it's biological or if it's fair trade or if it's whatever. If you were to put a label on machine learning PhDs in the future, right, what sort of measures do you think would be good from a sustainability, from an energy use, from an impact on society, right? What those things that people aren't mentioning in those 99 out of 100 papers at machine learning things, what sort of, are the things we should start thinking about to hold people accountable for the impact of their algorithms?
Also, in AI, I think the story is very mixed. So all the things that I talked about in my presentation, they really come out of the community. So it's not the public complaining that AI is unexplainable or unfair and oops, now we suddenly got to do something about it. Those concerns really come from the community, which I think is great. And they start up there. So for fairness, accountability, transparency, these social issues, in AI there is a lot of awareness and it's being translated into a research agenda. But for the environmental sustainability, there is near nothing.
Are you optimistic? Well, do you think that that's necessary? Your own background is in logic and in symbolic AI, so going from first principles and discovering knowledge or manipulating knowledge, whereas machine learning is more of a brute force statistical, let's churn and see what we get out of it. Do you think that in the future there'll be a retreat back to knowledge-based, specifically because of its efficiency, or maybe its efficiency, or maybe, is that an issue?
So this is already happening in AI, this combination of these two schools of thought, but the drivers are performance. We can do better machine learning, or we can do better reasoning if we combine the two. The driver is not, say, we need less training data, we can be more efficient if we combine it with knowledge bases, which is actually true, but that is not one of the drivers. So again, I was kind of shocked with myself how little the problems that Lorenz mentioned in his presentation, how little they play a role in the community's debate.
Let me ask Max of how this plays in the HCI community, what the environmental impact is, what the social impact. You and I both worked very long in the early days of social media, and everybody was accentuating the positive and actually didn't really realize the negative. If you look at the kind of interfaces that your group and other groups are studying now, are people looking at the negatives? One obvious negative is if you're wearing those glasses and answering queries, then it makes it very dangerous to cross the street. But what sort of potential problems do people see in that community with this new technology?
Dick, I think Max is.
This was for Max.
Yeah, I think you can't hear him. He's been trying to talk quite a bit. He's been trying to interject, but I'm not sure you can hear him.
Can you hear me now?
Here he is. Okay, Max, welcome. Welcome back.
Hi, before moving on, I want to make 2 comments on the last topics, if I'm permitted.
Sure.
On the critical assessment, I think we should admit psychology and the fact that, you know, we have confirmation biases, and we should definitely be trained, you know, to think about the negative influences of our technologies and of the things we're developing, but we'll never be perfect in this. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why we should bring in, you know, the external opinions and the external views early on. And a second reason for doing this is that the other side also has their psychological constraints. And I learned from people from political sciences that we're bringing in the public way too late. Usually they are, we have plans, we develop new projects, infrastructures, solutions, whatever, and then we expose it as a ready-made solution to the public, and we say, what do you think about this? You know, and they will always criticize very hard, you know, and when you bring them in early on and you make them part of the solution and part of those who develop the solution, this will turn around the attitude. And many of the problems we have with 5G these days are basically, you know, can be attributed to this fundamental error. So that's one comment on the critical discussion. I have a comment and more of a question regarding the AI, because I was fascinated by the idea to say, you know, we also have our, you know, natural eye intelligence inside our brains, and we don't know how it works. You know, pretty much like most of neural networks, etc. You know, the program is just built, and we don't know how our brain programs are built, but nevertheless, we can give rationales for what we do, you know. And I heard you say, Frank, we make them up. And I think that's an alley that's way underestimated, because if we really want explainable AI, then we have to pretty much forget about neural networks. They'll probably never be explainable. And they have a lot of power. You were talking about performance. So either we find different ways, and I found that such a fascinating idea. You know, can we have hope? Because on the other hand, the way you explained it, Frank, was by reintroducing semantics, and we kind of, you know, gave up semantics and ontologies and all that because we kind of found that for many problem domains it was too complicated. We were not able to build up the ontology of the world knowledge fast enough and all that. And then AI, machine learning came along and, you know, outperformed everything. Are we now reintroducing it, or, you know, what's your take on that? You know, is that really the ally for the solution?
The choice I had to make for being here was I was either here or at the International Joint Conference on Reasoning and Learning, right? So there's an entire conference on the combination of symbolic AI and statistical AI. So that pendulum is already swinging back as we speak. One of the hottest debate, pretty much every main AI conference over the last 5 years had at least one keynote speaker that was talking about the combination of symbolic and statistical AI. So what you expect is already happening.
And one of the things that you talked about was the legal framework. Do you think that and you had 3 categories of prohibited, very dangerous, and a little less dangerous, if I can categorize. Do you think that if symbolic AI, knowledge-based AI, tractable AI would come back, that the prohibited category would go away? That would take away the fear that is inherent in tossing things in a neural network and seeing what comes out?
Okay, let me go out on a limb and say yes. So I think one of the main drivers for this prohibited and very dangerous categories is that they are black boxes.
Right.
Right? That's the real driver for many of the justified driver for these fears. So if we have lots of information systems that take all kinds of complicated decisions, but we can inspect them and we can understand where the mistakes are being made, and then we can repair them. And when these black boxes become a little bit more transparent, then I think many of the worries also go away.
So you showed a nice example of the dog playing the guitar. In as much of a dog playing a guitar is a nice example, but you could see which bits influenced a decision. So that's another way of saying we'll keep the raw power of neural networks, but we'll invest more effort and undoubtedly more energy in trying to explain the results based on, but keeping the neural networks.
Yeah, so it's what Mark said, that this combination is really happening now, and it's mostly in response to, because we think that we can build better performance systems that way, but it's also in response to the social concerns.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know if Max or Mariana wants to say anything about this.
I'd just like to add that the concerns that come from people is that they want to understand, they don't need everything to be transparent to them. They don't need to know how a machine learning algorithm works. What they need to know is how that system came to the decision that it came to about them. So if you're asking for parole, if you're asking for a driving license, if you're asking, then they just need to know what were the factors here that made me ineligible for parole, for example. They don't need to know if it's neural net, symbolic interact. They don't need to know any of that. So I think the explainability has got a little bit hijacked in terms of the transparency of everything, and it's meaningful transparency for people. It's not that we really need, now whether or not technically, in order to be able to do that, you need to know exactly how everything's working in order to be able to come to those conclusions, to tell people those consequences and the reasons for a decision. But from my part, certainly, that's all they need to know. They want to know why a system made a decision about them that it did.
Yeah, and a part of that goes back to a trust relationship. When I moved to the Netherlands, one of the things that surprised me is that when a complicated topic was being discussed on the news, often a professor was brought in as someone who would explain that domain. In the United States, where I grew up before then, that almost never happened on the news. Professors there weren't seen as an independent authority. So maybe the good news for us is that at least here they're still seen as an independent authority that is free from the technology, and maybe that's another part of this aspect. I think if somebody rejects you for a loan, right, or if an algorithm doesn't come up with a suitable partner for you on a dating site, right, you're always going to wonder exactly why. And many of those things aren't actually that important. Well, the partner on the dating site is, but but there are some critical things that people really do want to know about. And I think that things that have legal ramifications, things that go beyond the personal and hit the societal, may be the areas that are the hardest and the most important to solve.
But isn't that the categorization of the EU?
Sorry?
Isn't that exactly the categorization that the EU tried?
Frank?
Yeah, so I think it's totally fair to say, well, you can only apply AI in these cases if you fulfill certain conditions, right? So this is the medium category, right? We impose conditions on them. I think it's very controversial to say you shall never apply AI to some categories. So this high risk category where AI is prohibited, I think that's the most controversial part of the law.
And is that the most controversial? I mean, it seems to be controversial on two levels. One, the legal community doesn't think that the prohibited list is long enough, and the scientific community, or in any case the AI community, thinks that the list is too long. Does the AI community think that there is any list? I mean, you don't have to speak for the entire community, but your impression is given the position of the AI community of Claire, would there be anything on that prohibited list?
I'm very interested to hear what people in the room would think about this. If people in the room think
I have an opinion.
Okay, well, you're sort of in the room, Max, so we can have your opinion. And if anybody else thinks about this, we'd love to have a microphone go to somebody. You know, the question is, if there is a prohibited list, right, should it be empty philosophically, because you shouldn't prohibit these kinds of things, you should just maybe post facto control them, or are there things, and then specifically for AI, that we should be prohibiting? Max, you can go first while the microphone goes around.
I think it depends. If there is, for instance, no way a human being can decide at that speed that is at stake, you know, and AI is the best solution that we can come up with, why shouldn't it even come in when lives are at stake?
So you think nothing should be on the prohibited list?
You know, not generally, not a domain as such, you know. But of course, the more dangerous, the more life-threatening things can be, the tighter the conditions should be. Okay.
From the audience, if you could identify yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Ivica Crnkovic. I'm from Chalmers University. I'm software engineer, a professor in software engineering. And when I'm listening to your discussion, I'm wondering, you know, we are talking about properties and concerns which are related to systems or to the entire environment, and we are talking about technology or AI, and that is about components. And when you are making a component, you actually don't have this aspect in a component. So if you are like producing a knife can be very dangerous and can be very useful. And it's very difficult to make, you know, prohibit to produce knives. So you must have these system aspects.
So I think it's a very good point, and we've been sloppy in our language, and actually the EU has been more precise. So they don't prohibit AI systems, they prohibit certain uses of AI systems. And I think that comes very close to what you have in mind, that you cannot, it's not saying, well, we prohibit neural networks or whatever, but they prohibit the use of AI for something. And that I think is what you have in mind with your question. So the EU, we have been sloppy about this, but the law is doing precisely as you ask.
Yeah, although I would think that we could all agree that Kalashnikovs, right, are that, I suppose you could use them to cut down a tree, right? But, you know, those are things that it is valid to prohibit. And the question is, but it's a philosophical choice, right? Can you ever prohibit an application of something? So, I'd like to move back to energy for a second. And Lorenz, I'd like to move back to you. We are, some of us used to be comfortable with the notion that if you mail a letter to somebody, you have to put a postage stamp on it because there is a cost to collecting, sorting, transmitting, and delivering information. That notion seems to have gone away. It's gone away partially because of the public perception, but mostly because of a perceived competitive advantage of the telecommunications community, right? Which has gone away from charging for bits to going to monthly subscriptions. If we look at the sustainability of social media, and not only from an energy, but also from a, you know, this post-truth society, getting back to a truth society. You mentioned, as a response to one of Frank's questions, that economic constraints might be the most appropriate way, right, of controlling not so much the information, but the flow of this information, much in the same way that you couldn't with a postal mail spam an entire community because it would be too expensive to buy all those stamps, right? How do you see the future of social media from both an energy and from a societal point of view? Have you thought about that? Is that something that you can comment on?
Yes, I think that we today live in a strange situation that many things seem to be free, yes, but they are in fact not. They would cost a very, very little fee. For example, if you do a Google search, yes, it is interesting that the Google search as such and transmitting the result to you is the cheapest part of it. And what is built around of this to organize all this custom tailored advertising and recommendation and so on needs the largest part of the energy and the largest part of all the equipment that is behind. So you pay for the search result by inducing an additional and even much bigger waste of resources than what would be needed for what you want to get. So if I would pay just for the search result and for that get rid of all the nudging around of it, yes,
Yeah.
then it would be really cheap. Not only for me, it would be maybe 1 cent or less, but it would also reduce the social cost of all these things. So if we would find a new, more economically sound model of the whole web activities, I think it would be worth developing such a model. I don't know if it is realistic to introduce this in this existing world, but in principle it can be. It is imaginable that this would work better.
And who should do that? Should we as a community do that? Should the legal profession mandate that Google be paid by user fees instead of by advertising revenues? Is this something that the economics faculty should research? Whereas, who's going to manage a transformation like this?
I think that's really a really hard question. So,
yeah,
I think it's in the end it's a political issue. Yes, so politics should come back into the control of what happens here today.
Okay. Any comments from the audience here or the audience of Vienna? Are you looking at the audience abroad or okay? Max, if we go back to your the question on your interfaces, what's the killer application that you think is going to move us away from information being hidden behind glass to information seemingly being more accessible directly by a user?
Well, I think it's going to come in the context of urban environments. We currently see Google and Apple racing towards building 3D models of the entire world. We had maps, two-dimensional maps all the time. And one of the problems with maps that we, highly educated people don't perceive that well is that you always have to make a match between what you see on the map and where things actually are. So you always go back and forth between the map and the reality. With AR, you don't need that anymore. Plus, of course, you can provide information much more appropriately, really wrapped around the physical objects, etc. And this is a vision that these companies put billions of dollars in. The rate at which Google, for instance, makes flyovers on planes over major cities and hubs is insane. They are rebuilding these 3D models at ever growing resolution, and they have their vision about how this will change the way we are dealing with information as we roam about, as we move, as we are, in cities and other landscapes in the long run. What is, of course, unsolved is really the question of how this is displayed onto our eyes. And they're also investing in doing mergers and acquisitions like mad with every company that has a little step forward in this. So that's the big unknown. You know, how fast we'll get goggles that will enable the projection of all this into our eyes. But that's definitely what's going to come, and what Apple and Google and companies alike are pursuing, also Microsoft. And I'm just saying that it's something to be observed. I'm not praising this. I'm just saying this could be a big step forward also in the move towards providing the necessary information to the end users, to the customers that we need for sustainability. Because my claim is sustainability is very much about the right information, the true information at the right points, because we need a lot of information to make good decisions. That's my point.
Okay, Frank?
Yeah, so I think this is a great use case for Marina's anticipation phase, right? So Max is now he's predicting some new technology, right? Augmented reality for navigation and for information providing. And so my question to Max is, are you actually anticipating negative consequences? Do you think it is useful or even possible to try to think of the possible consequences? And the question for Marina is this the right stage to do it, or is it already too late?
Max can go first.
I definitely anticipate negative consequences. We are living in this era of fake news and disinformation, of deep fake videos, etc. So even with the glass wall, we cannot distinguish anymore between right and wrong, between trustworthy and fake information. Now, if we overlay digital information onto everything, the cyber and the real will get so blurred that in the end, in the long run, definitely it's going to be very difficult to understand even what is reality, what is truth, and what not. So that's a big, big danger in my eyes.
Okay.
And I would totally agree with that. Thank you for that. It's also, I think, Mark Weiser's dream, if you remember, of augmented reality at the beginning, that everything would disappear into the walls, and we would have this wonderful world where we wouldn't have the glass, or everything would be at our fingertips. And I think we've already seen some of the downsides of that in terms of privacy, and because of the models that these things have been built upon. So I think it's great that you have identified that. What on earth could the consequences of not being able to tell the difference between the cyber world and the real world be? It's getting hard enough as it is anyway now, as you pointed out. So we would really have to go into that with some deliberation before we rolled these things out, for sure. Because every technology has dual purpose. Everything, a knife, a gun, anything you're going to build, we can use it for good or we can use it for bad. And most of them have very, very strong dual purposes.
Okay, Frank?
Do you think that this anticipating is actually possible? So I think with none of the technologies that happened during my lifetime, we were particularly good at anticipating at all. So are we not just condemned to just reacting rather than...
I hope not. Otherwise, my talk was completely useless. I think we are all very good at anticipating things. When you drive your car, you learn how to anticipate what is coming up in the road in front of you. You learn to read the road, which is why I was talking about reading the road. We have had so many experiences now of technology which has come up with unintended and unexpected things, everything from social media, as you brought up earlier, Dick. The promises were amazing of what would happen, user-generated content. It would be fantastic. We didn't sit down to think about, what will actually happen when we're not regulating that, when anybody can say what they want. So we can draw on some of the experiences of the past now as examples from lessons learned. I think somebody brought this up in the audience, that we're so bad at doing this. Talk about it, the lessons learned, in order to think about how that future technology may or may not pan out. So we can do that. I think we can do that anticipation.
I also think we can compare that to the fun of doing research. I mean, you can do research by always identifying new problems that you want to solve, and you can have a life as a researcher, but you can also try to have visions and to pursue them. And that's what I did all my life as a researcher. And I was never completely right, you know. So I anticipated things. I was trying to go towards that vision, and I moved steps forward. And then I realized I have to go a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right again. And the same is true for anticipation. You anticipate things, and you'll never be 100% correct, but you're already walking in the right direction, and you're already advanced when things happen, and you are already prepared some way. And you will always also fail.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Mats, because the computer scientists have a mindset to solve things. They love to get the problem and solve it. So if you're able to sort of say, you know, this is not about saying, no, you can't do this. This is about saying, what are those issues? And then how will you address that as a problematization, as a design issue? It's really quite nice.
Okay, with an eye on the clock, maybe we can summarize this as saying that things will never be as good as you hope, and they'll probably be worse than you think. So, Enrico has a question, and then we're going to wrap up here.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, again, Enrico Nardelli. So, connected to the last comment by Marina, and one of the last sentence on Frank's presentation, the one that said, start working with social scientists before they start working without you. Don't you think we should also educate our students, graduate students, and even before then to reason, to be able to read the road, as Marina appropriately said, looking at reality not only with computer scientist eyes, but also with social scientist eyes. Therefore, educating them not only in algorithms, systems, network, but also in a little bit in psychology, anthropology, sociology, because this will be more and more important. Otherwise, we will only be able to discover the issues afterwards, which is, good, but maybe bad.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go past our four speakers in reverse order with the following question. If you had a brilliant researcher who was interdisciplinary in training, and if sustainability in whatever form was a key concern, what would you advise her to devote her research life to in terms of solving critical problems in our society? And we'll have Frank go first.
Gee, thanks. So the key sustainability-related question that I would have her work on. Well, I come back to the surprise that I had, my own surprise during Lorenz's talk, and the resources that we are wasting, both in devices. I was shocked by my ignorance that I didn't know that buying a device, that's 10 times the energy used than using it over its lifetime. So solving the resources waste, both in energy and materials, in computing, I think that's the inspiration that Lorenz gave me this morning.
Okay, thank you. Marina?
I would echo what Frank has said, and I would add, as part of that, the social justice, the equity, the equitable. We need to get much better at understanding what the consequences both of our ICT is going to be in terms of its carbon footprint, but also how we're going to make sense of that in terms of the fact that the people who are suffering most from our waste are the people who generate the least of that waste in the global south. And we need to be able to come up with much more equitable societies and to, in that way, start to reduce this horrible gap of the very rich and the very poor, because this is also exacerbating these situations politically.
Okay, thank you. Max, what would you have her work on?
Probably on modeling and conveying relevance and trustworthiness of information. Because in the sustainability business, my personal impression is that we have the biggest trouble in understanding the relevance, the relative importance of things. We tend to discuss things and bring them to the table and have everybody discuss them, and others are much more important. So what is relevant and what is really trustworthy in terms of information? These are the two issues that I think are predominant, and then how to convey that to a user in a daily dealing with sustainability information.
Okay, thank you. And the final word goes to Lorenz, who gave us the first words this morning, right? What would you have her work on?
So sometimes I think that we are using the whole digital transformation to even faster motivate each other to do things that nobody wanted. So we compete in the field of consumption, which is not really. So we create additional wants and needs in a world that is limited. And I think we have what concerns the climate destabilization, what concerns the biodiversity, etc. We have collective action problems. So most people see that we must find a way out of this this problem, but nobody can do the first move. Mm-hmm. Also between the nations, we have these problems of the policies that yes. So it is a collective action problem, and I think this has a logical structure that can be analyzed, and maybe there is a solution to that. I hope so.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like she should be well versed in political science to be able to make a move. I would like to thank Frank, and I would like to thank Lorenz here in Madrid, and Marina and Max in Oxford and in Darmstadt. I'd like to thank those of you who are watching and those of you who have been here. We spent a lot of time talking about sustainability. Unfortunately, one of the things that is not sustainable is the Zoom link that you have used this morning. For the afternoon session starting at 3 o'clock, you need to switch over to a different Zoom link. So for those of you who are not here, please do that. And for the rest, thank you very much. Thank you to the people here in the crowd, and enjoy the rest of the symposium here. Thank you.